The sun, a dying ember in the vast expanse of sky, baked the parched earth. Hannah Moore, her auburn hair tangled and whipped by the relentless wind, squinted at the horizon. The Moore homestead, once her father's pride, was now a skeletal husk beneath the merciless glare. Wind devils danced across the barren fields, swirling dust and grit into frenzied spirals. The keening whine of the wind through the cracked earth, punctuated by the rhythmic rasp of sand against the window panes, composed a mournful symphony. Hannah wasn't a widow. Her father, a man hardened by grit and stubborn dreams, had abandoned the family to chase the shimmering phantom of gold. Her mother, unable to bear the harsh realities of the land and the deeper wound of abandonment, had succumbed to illness months ago. Now Hannah was left alone, the weight of responsibility heavy on her young shoulders, caring for her younger brother Caleb, a frail and timid boy. Inside the dilapidated house, Caleb coughed a harsh, racking sound that tore at Hannah's heart. The fever had clung to him for days, and Hannah felt her hope dwindling with each passing hour. She had exhausted their meager supply of medicine, but Caleb's condition remained unchanged. Their water reserves were dangerously low. Her only hope was the rain that had been promised for days, but the sky remained a mocking, cloudless blue. Suddenly, the distant drumming of hooves sliced through the desolate soundscape. Hannah narrowed her eyes, peering towards the source of the noise. A group of riders emerged from the shimmering heat haze, their figures silhouetted against the pale sand. These were not the settlers Hannah was accustomed to seeing. Their clothing was fashioned from animal hides, adorned with feathers. Their faces were painted in strange, intricate patterns, and they carried an array of weapons, bows, arrows, spears, and knives glinting in the dying sunlight. They were Apache warriors. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard countless stories about the Apache tales whispered around campfires, painting them as ruthless, savage raiders who brought death and destruction. Fear coiled in her stomach, a cold knot of dread. But she forced herself to remain calm. She had to protect Caleb. The riders halted at the edge of the property. A tall, powerfully built warrior, astride a jet-black stallion, rode forward. A long, jagged scar marred his right cheek, adding to the fierce intensity of his gaze. His eyes sharp as obsidian blades fixed on Hannah. "We need water," he said, his voice roughened by the wind and dust. Hannah swallowed her throat dry. She knew that refusal could mean violence, but she couldn't let them into the house. Not with Caleb so vulnerable. I don't have much water." She stammered, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. The warrior studied her for a long moment, his gaze seeming to penetrate her defenses. Then he turned and spoke to the others in rapid Apache. Hannah couldn't understand the words, but a chilling premonition settled over her. The sky abruptly darkened. A mass of bruised, menacing clouds rolled in, swallowing the last vestiges of sunlight. The wind howled, whipping the sand into a blinding frenzy. The sandstorm had arrived. The sandstorm descended, with the fury of a vengeful god, blotting out the sun and transforming the world into a swirling vortex of dust and grit. Hannah stumbled back towards the house, the wind tearing at her clothes, the gritty sand stinging her eyes. Fear, raw and visceral, clawed at her throat. She barely managed to slam the door shut before the full force of the storm hit the house. Groaning under the onslaught, inside the air was thick with dust, the only light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, eerie shadows. Caleb whimpered, his small body trembling with fever and fear. Hannah knelt beside him, wrapping him in a thin, worn blanket, trying to shield him from the storm raging outside. She felt utterly helpless, trapped between the fury of nature and the perceived threat of the Apache warriors. The wind howled like a banshee, Rattling the windows and shaking the foundations of the house, Hannah wondered if the fragile structure would withstand the onslaught. She pictured the Apache warriors out there, exposed to the full force of the storm. Were they sheltering somewhere? Or were they riding through the blinding chaos, unfazed by the elements? Suddenly a loud crash echoed from the back of the house. Hannah's heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed a rusty shovel, her only weapon, and crept towards the sound, her every nerve on fire. She peered through a crack in the boarded-up back door and saw that the storm had ripped a section of the roof away, leaving a gaping hole exposed to the swirling sand. As she stared at the damage, a figure emerged from the swirling dust. It was the Apache warrior, the one who had spoken to her earlier. He stood there silhouetted against the raging storm, his features obscured by the swirling sand. For a heart-stopping moment, Hannah thought he had come to attack them, but then she saw him move towards the damaged roof. He began to pull debris away from the hole, his movements strong and purposeful. Seemingly oblivious to the stinging sand and the howling wind, Hannah watched in stunned silence. Why was he helping her? Was this some kind of trick? Or was he simply seeking shelter from the storm? Hesitantly, Hannah opened the door a crack. "What? What are you doing?" she shouted over the roar of the wind. The warrior turned, his dark eyes piercing through the swirling dust. He gestured towards the damaged roof, then pointed to himself, and then back at the house. Hannah understood he was offering to help repair the roof. Despite her fear and suspicion, Hannah knew she couldn't refuse. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the roof needed to be fixed. She opened the door wider, gesturing for him to come inside. The warrior stepped into the house, bringing with him the scent of the desert and the raw energy of the storm. He moved with a quiet grace that belied his powerful physique. He examined the damage, his eyes assessing the situation with a calm efficiency. Then he began to work, using whatever materials he could find, scraps of wood, pieces of metal, even his own clothing, to patch the hole in the roof. As he worked, Hannah watched him, a mixture of fear and fascination swirling within her. The storm raged outside, but inside the small, dilapidated house, a strange kind of peace began to settle. The warrior's presence, once a source of terror, now felt protective. Perhaps the stories she had heard about the Apache were wrong. Perhaps there was more to this man and to his people than she had ever imagined. The storm, a destructive force of nature, had brought them together in a most unexpected way. And in the eye of the storm, a fragile seed of hope began to take root. The storm raged through the night, a relentless symphony of wind and sand. Inside the small house, an uneasy truce held. The Apache warrior, whom Hannah now knew as Chayton, worked tirelessly, patching the damaged roof with a skill that surprised her. Caleb's fever finally broke towards dawn, and he slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos that had surrounded him. Hannah, exhausted but relieved, watched Chayton work the flickering lamplight, casting dancing shadows on his face. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the swirling dust, the storm finally began to subside. The wind died down, the sand settled, and the world slowly emerged from the dusty shroud. The damage to the ranch was evident. Fences were down, the barn door hung precariously from a single hinge, and the fields were buried under a thick layer of sand. But the house, thanks to Chayton's efforts, was still standing. Chayton stepped back, surveying his handiwork. He met Hannah's gaze, his dark eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been pride or perhaps just satisfaction. He gestured towards the east, where the sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Then he turned and walked towards the door. Hannah watched him, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Was he leaving? After all he had done, she felt a strange reluctance to see him go. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Chayton paused, turning back to face her. "Thank you," Hannah said the words, feeling inadequate. For everything." Chayton nodded, his expression unreadable. He pointed to Caleb, then to Hannah, and then to himself, drawing a circle in the air with his finger, a silent promise of protection. Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the morning mist. Hannah stood at the doorway watching as he walked towards the group of warriors, waiting patiently at the edge of the property. They mounted their horses and rode away, their figures quickly swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Hannah felt a pang of loss, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. He was a stranger, an Apache warrior, someone she should fear. Yet he had helped her, protected her and Caleb. He had shown her kindness when she least expected it. As the dust settled, Hannah surveyed the damage to her ranch. The task ahead seemed daunting, almost insurmountable. But as she looked at the patched roof, a testament to Chayton's unexpected act of kindness, a flicker of hope rekindled within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could rebuild. Later that morning, as Hannah and Caleb were clearing the debris from the yard, they discovered something buried in the sand near the well. It was a small leather pouch, intricately decorated with beads and feathers. Inside, they found a handful of dried herbs and a small, smooth stone carved in the shape of a hawk. Hannah recognized the herbs as medicinal, used by the Apache to treat fevers. The hawk, she knew, was a symbol of strength and protection. Chayton hadn't just saved their home. He had left them a gift, a silent message of hope and resilience. As Hannah held the stone in her hand, she realized that the whispers in the dust carried more than just the echoes of the storm. They carried the whispers of a connection, a bond forged in the heart of chaos, a bond that transcended fear and prejudice. The whispers hinted at a future uncertain, yet full of possibilities, a future where perhaps, just perhaps, an unlikely alliance could blossom in the most desolate of landscapes. Weeks turned into months. The relentless sun continued its assault on the land, baking the earth to a dry, cracked crust. Life on the Moore Ranch was a constant struggle for survival. Hannah worked tirelessly, repairing fences, tending to their small patch of surviving crops, and caring for Caleb, whose health remained fragile. The encounter with Chayton and his warriors had become a strange, almost dreamlike memory. Yet Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were destined to cross again. The small pouch of herbs Chayton had left proved invaluable. Hannah used them to treat Caleb's recurring fevers, and the boy slowly regained his strength. She often found herself holding the hawkstone, its smooth surface a comforting presence in her hand. It was a tangible reminder of the unexpected kindness she had received, a symbol of hope in a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. One scorching afternoon, as Hannah was returning from a fruitless search for water in the dried-up creek bed, she saw a rider approaching in the distance. Her heart quickened. The rider's posture, the way he sat on his horse, was unmistakably Apache. As he drew closer, Hannah recognized the distinctive scar on his cheek. It was Chayton. He dismounted silently, his dark eyes scanning the ranch, taking in the evidence of Hannah's struggles. He gestured towards the well which had run dry weeks ago. Hannah nodded, her heart sinking. The lack of water was a constant threat, a reminder of their precarious existence. Chayton spoke to her in broken English, his voice low and guttural. "Water. Gone." Hannah nodded again, tears stinging her eyes. The creek, dry, the well, empty. Chayton listened intently, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked towards a rocky outcrop at the edge of the property. He gestured for Hannah to follow. Hannah hesitated. She still felt a flicker of unease in his presence, a remnant of the fear she had been taught to feel towards the Apache. But she also felt a strange sense of trust, a belief that he wouldn't harm her. She followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. Chayton stopped at the base of the outcrop and pointed to a small fissure in the rock face. He picked up a loose stone and struck the rock, a sharp, resonant sound echoing through the still air. He repeated the process several times, listening intently. Then he began to dig, using his hands and a small knife he carried with him. Hannah watched him, puzzled. What was he doing? Was he searching for something? Or was this some kind of ritual? After what seemed like an eternity, Chayton's fingers struck something hard. He dug deeper, his movements becoming more frantic. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, he pulled a large rock away, revealing a small hidden spring. Water trickled from the fissure, clear and cool, a precious lifeblood in the parched landscape. Hannah stared at the water tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe it. Chayton had found water, a hidden source that she had never known existed. He had saved them. Chayton looked at her, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. He cupped his hands, filling them with water, and offered it to her. Hannah drank deeply, the cool water quenching her thirst and washing away the dust and despair of the past months. The weight of gratitude settled upon Hannah, a heavy, almost suffocating feeling. She looked at Chayton, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She didn't know how to thank him, how to repay him for this incredible act of kindness. She realized that the stories she had been told, the prejudices she had held, were wrong. Chayton wasn't a savage, an enemy. He was a savior, a friend. And in the heart of the desolate landscape, a bond of respect and understanding, stronger than any prejudice, began to grow. The discovery of the hidden spring brought a fragile sense of stability to the Moore ranch. With a reliable source of water, Hannah and Caleb were able to revive their crops and nurture their small herd of livestock back to health. The shadow of starvation receded, replaced by a cautious optimism. Chayton remained a silent, watchful presence. He would appear at the ranch every few weeks, sometimes bringing small gifts, medicinal herbs, a freshly killed rabbit, a piece of turquoise he had found in the canyons. He never stayed long, but his visits became a source of comfort and reassurance for Hannah. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Chayton sat with Hannah by the fire. Caleb was asleep inside the house, his breathing shallow and even. The silence between Hannah and Chayton was comfortable, unbroken by the need for words. They watched the flames dance, the crackling fire, a comforting counterpoint to the vast stillness of the desert night. Hannah, emboldened by the growing trust between them, decided to break the silence. "Why? Why do you help us?" she asked, her voice soft. Chayton looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. He spoke in broken English, his voice low and hesitant. "Land. This land. It remembers." Hannah frowned, puzzled. "Remembers what?" Chayton sighed, a sound heavy with sorrow. He gestured towards the surrounding landscape, his hand sweeping across the vast expanse of desert. "Long ago, my people, we lived here. This land, our home." Hannah's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. She had never considered the history of the land, the people who had lived here before the settlers arrived. She had only seen it as a harsh, unforgiving wilderness. But Chayton saw something more, something deeper, something she was only beginning to understand. The settlers, they took our land, our homes. Chayton continued, his voice laced with bitterness. They brought sickness, death. He paused, his gaze fixed on the flames. "My family, gone. My wife, my daughter." His voice trailed off, lost in the crackling of the fire. Hannah listened in stunned silence. She had heard stories about the conflicts between the settlers and the Apache, but they had always seemed distant, abstract. Now hearing Chayton's story, the history of the land became real tangible, filled with pain and loss. I'm so sorry," Hannah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Chayton looked at her, his eyes softening. He shook his head. "Not your fault, but the land remembers. It whispers of the past." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the mournful cry of a coyote in the distance. Hannah looked at Chayton, seeing him not just as an Apache warrior, but as a man who had suffered, a man who carried the weight of his people's history on his shoulders, and she realized that her gratitude towards him was not just for the water he had found, but for the glimpse he had given her into the true heart of the land, a heart filled with both beauty and sorrow. The shadows of the past stretched long across the desert, but in the shared silence between them, a fragile bridge of understanding began to form, a bridge built on empathy and respect. A bridge that spanned the chasm of cultural divide. The fragile peace that had settled over the Moore ranch was shattered one sweltering afternoon. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, their figures growing larger against the shimmering heat haze. They weren't Apache. These men wore the familiar garb of settlers, but their faces were grim, their eyes hard. Hannah recognized the leader, Jedediah Foster, a ruthless rancher, known for his greed and his hatred of the Apache. Foster and his men rode straight towards the house, their horses kicking up dust devils in their wake. Hannah stepped out onto the porch, Caleb clinging to her skirt, his eyes wide with fear. She knew instinctively that trouble had arrived. "Hannah Moore!" Foster sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "We know you've been harboring an Apache. We've seen him sneaking around your property." Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that denying it would be pointless. Foster and his men had clearly been watching her, waiting for an opportunity to confront her. He helped us," Hannah stammered, her voice trembling. "He found water for us when our well ran dry." Foster laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Water, huh? More likely he's been stealing your livestock and poisoning your well. These savages can't be trusted." "He hasn't stolen anything," Hannah insisted, her voice rising. "He's been nothing but kind to us." "Kindness?" Foster spat on the ground. "You're a fool, woman. These Apache are nothing but murderers and thieves. They'll turn on you the first chance they get." He gestured towards his men. "We're here to rid this land of vermin. Tell us where he is and we'll make it quick." Hannah stood her ground, her fear giving way to anger. "He's not here!" She lied, her voice shaking but resolute. "And even if he were, I wouldn't betray him to you." Foster's eyes narrowed, his face darkening with rage. "You'll regret this, woman, you and your brat." He turned to his men. "Search the property. If you find the savage, kill him on sight." Foster's men dismounted and began to search the ranch, their boots crunching on the dry earth. Caleb whimpered, burying his face in Hannah's skirt. Hannah held him close, her heart pounding with fear and defiance. She knew that Chayton was somewhere nearby, watching. She prayed that he would stay hidden, that he wouldn't try to defend her. She couldn't bear the thought of him being hurt or worse, killed because of her. The search continued, the tension thick and suffocating. The sun beat down mercilessly, the air still and heavy with the threat of violence. The whispers of the wind, once a source of comfort, now seemed to carry the echoes of a gathering storm, a storm that threatened to engulf Hannah and everything she held dear. She knew that this confrontation was inevitable, a clash between two worlds, two cultures, two ways of life, and she knew that the consequences could be devastating. Foster's men fanned out across the ranch, their movements rough and menacing, their eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice. Hannah stood on the porch, her arms wrapped protectively around Caleb, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the harsh cries of crows circling overhead. Suddenly, an arrow whistled through the air, embedding itself in the wooden post beside Hannah's head. A warning. Foster's men froze their eyes, darting towards the direction from which the arrow had come. Then another arrow flew, this one striking the ground at Foster's feet, the feathered shaft quivering in the dry earth. Chayton emerged from the shadows of the barn, his bow drawn, his dark eyes burning with a fierce intensity. He stood tall and proud, his presence a stark contrast to the cowering figures of Foster's men. He spoke in Apache, his voice ringing with authority. The words a challenge, a declaration of defiance. Foster, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly. He sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. "So the savage shows himself. I should have known you were hiding somewhere, waiting to ambush us." "This is my land," Chayton replied in broken English, his voice low and menacing. "You have no right to be here. Your land." Foster laughed, a harsh, derisive sound. "This land belongs to those who claim it, those who have the strength to hold it. And you, savage, are no match for us." He gestured to his men. "Get him." Foster's men hesitated, their bravado faltering in the face of Chayton's unwavering gaze. They had underestimated him, seen him as a solitary figure, easy prey. But now they saw the warrior in him, the fierce protector, the embodiment of a spirit that refused to be broken. Before Foster's men could react, Chayton let loose another arrow, this one aimed not to kill, but to ignite. The arrow, tipped with a flaming piece of cloth soaked in oil, arced through the air and landed in the dry brush near the barn. The flames caught quickly, spreading through the parched vegetation with alarming speed. The sudden eruption of fire startled Foster and his men. The wind shifted, carrying the smoke and flames towards them, the heat scorching their faces. Their horses whinnied nervously, pawing the ground. Foster, realizing that he had underestimated Chayton's cunning, cursed under his breath. "Retreat," he yelled, his voice laced with panic. Foster and his men scrambled back onto their horses and rode away, the flames licking at their heels. Chayton watched them go, his expression impassive. He had defended his land, protected Hannah and Caleb, not with brute force, but with strategy and a deep understanding of the land itself. The fire, a symbol of destruction, had become a tool of liberation, driving away the invaders and preserving the fragile peace of the ranch. Hannah still clutching, Caleb watched in awe as Chayton turned towards her, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. He had risked everything to protect them. And in that moment, Hannah realized that the bond between them was deeper than she had ever imagined. It was a bond forged in fire, a bond that transcended language and culture, a bond that would forever link their destinies. The fire burned itself out, leaving behind a blackened scar on the land, a stark reminder of the recent conflict. The ranch, though spared from serious damage, felt vulnerable, exposed. The threat of Foster and his men lingered in the air, a shadow hanging over Hannah and Caleb. Chayton stayed at the ranch that night, keeping watch, his presence a silent reassurance. He sat by the dying embers of the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Hannah sat beside him, Caleb asleep in her lap. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Hannah looked at Chayton, tracing the long scar that ran down his cheek. She had never asked him about it, sensing that it was a story he wasn't ready to share. But tonight, in the aftermath of the fire, the silence felt different, charged with a shared experience, a mutual understanding. How did you get your scar?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chayton turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. He was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. Then he began to speak, his voice low and resonant. The words a mixture of broken English and Apache. Hannah piecing together the meaning as he spoke. He told her of a raid years ago, when a group of settlers attacked his village, stealing horses and killing indiscriminately. Chayton, still a young boy at the time, had fought to protect his family. But he was overpowered. A settler's knife had slashed across his face, leaving him with a permanent reminder of the violence and loss he had endured. As Chayton spoke, Hannah listened intently, her heart aching for the pain he had suffered. She saw him not just as a warrior, but as a survivor, a man who carried the weight of his people's history etched onto his skin. When he finished speaking, a long silence settled between them. Hannah reached out and gently touched the scar on his cheek. Chayton didn't flinch his eyes, holding hers with a steady gaze. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a connection forged not through words, but through the shared language of scars, the unspoken stories etched onto their bodies and souls. Hannah realized that she, too, carried scars, invisible wounds that ran deep. The abandonment of her father, the death of her mother, the constant struggle for survival. These experiences had shaped her, molded her into the woman she was today. And just as Chayton's scar was a testament to his resilience, her own invisible scars were a testament to her strength. The night deepened, the stars blazing across the vast expanse of sky. Hannah and Chayton sat in silence, their shared experience creating a bond between them, a bond stronger than words, a bond that transcended the differences in their cultures and backgrounds. The whispers of the wind carried not just the echoes of the fire, but the whispers of hope, the promise of a future where healing and understanding could blossom in the most unlikely of places. The language of scars, a language of pain and resilience, had become a language of connection, a silent testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. The weeks that followed were a time of uneasy peace. Foster and his men, though driven back by the fire, were still a lurking threat. Hannah knew that they wouldn't give up easily. They would be back. But for now, the ranch was safe, and a fragile sense of normalcy returned. Chayton continued to visit his presence, becoming a source of comfort and strength for Hannah. He helped her with the chores, taught Caleb how to track animals, and shared his knowledge of the desert, its hidden springs and secret trails. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He was a man of few words, but his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty resonated deeply with Hannah. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Chayton told Hannah about the growing tensions within his own tribe. Some of the younger warriors, eager for revenge against the settlers, were growing restless. They wanted to fight to reclaim their ancestral lands. Chayton, a man of peace, was struggling to maintain control to prevent further bloodshed. "My people, they are divided," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "Some, they want war. But war, it brings only more pain, more loss." Hannah listened, her heart heavy with understanding. She had seen the destructive power of hatred and prejudice firsthand. She knew that violence would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and suffering. Is there nothing that can be done?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Chayton looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "There is one way," he said slowly, "a way to build trust, to create peace. But it is a difficult path, a dangerous path." He explained that there was a sacred spring located deep within the canyons, a place revered by both the Apache and the settlers. If they could hold a council, there a meeting between the leaders of both sides, they might be able to negotiate a truce, a path towards peaceful coexistence. Hannah listened, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. It was a risky plan, fraught with danger. but it was also their only hope. She looked at Chayton, seeing the courage and determination in his eyes. She knew that he was willing to risk everything for peace, and she knew that she had to stand with him. "I'll help you," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever I can." Chayton nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He knew that the journey to the sacred spring would be perilous, that they would face opposition from both sides. But he also knew that Hannah's courage and unwavering belief in peace would be their greatest strength. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky, Hannah and Chayton prepared for their journey. They packed supplies, saddled their horses, and set out towards the canyons, their hearts filled with hope, their minds focused on the difficult task ahead. The seeds of trust planted in the heart of the desert had begun to sprout, but their survival was far from certain. The path to peace was long and arduous, and the shadows of the past still loomed large. The journey to the sacred spring was arduous and fraught with danger. Hannah and Chayton rode through scorching deserts, navigated treacherous canyons, and evaded patrols of both Apache warriors and settler militias. The tension between their two peoples was a palpable force, a storm cloud hanging heavy in the air. Yet as they rode side by side, a deeper understanding grew between Hannah and Chayton. They shared stories, their words bridging the chasm of cultural difference, their shared experiences creating a bond of respect and trust. Finally, after days of relentless travel, they reached the sacred spring, nestled deep within the heart of the canyons. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, a hidden oasis of lush vegetation and crystal-clear water. A sense of peace permeated the air, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the turmoil of the world outside. As Hannah and Chayton waited, representatives from both the Apache and the settlers began to arrive. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with suspicion and mistrust. Foster was among the settlers, his eyes burning with hatred as he glared at Chayton. But there were others, like Elder Two Moons, a respected Apache elder, and Jacob Gray, a settler known for his wisdom and fairness, who held on to the flickering hope for peace. Chayton stepped forward, his voice echoing through the canyon. He spoke of the need for understanding, for forgiveness, for a future where their children could live in peace. He spoke of the shared history of the land, the interconnectedness of all living things. His words, spoken in both Apache and English, resonated with a power that transcended language. Hannah watched as the faces of the assembled crowd began to soften. The seeds of trust, planted so carefully, were beginning to take root. Even Foster's hardened expression seemed to crack a flicker of doubt, replacing the unwavering hatred in his eyes. Elder Two Moons spoke next, his voice filled with the wisdom of generations. He echoed Chayton's words, emphasizing the need for respect and cooperation. He spoke of the sacredness of the land, the importance of preserving it for future generations. Then Jacob Gray stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. He acknowledged the wrongs that had been committed, the pain and suffering that had been inflicted on both sides. He spoke of the need for forgiveness, for a new beginning, a future built on mutual respect and understanding. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon walls, an agreement was reached. A truce, fragile yet hopeful, was declared. It wasn't a perfect solution, not a complete resolution to the deep-seated conflicts between the Apache and the settlers, but it was a start, a first step towards a future where peace might be possible. As Hannah and Chayton rode back to the ranch, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they knew that the journey ahead would still be challenging. The echoes of the past still resonated in the canyons. The shadows of prejudice and hatred still lingered, but the seeds of trust had been planted, and with careful nurturing, they might one day blossom into a lasting peace. The whispers of the wind carried not just the echoes of the past, but the whispers of hope, the promise of a future where two cultures once divided by conflict could find a way to coexist, to share the land, and to honor the sacredness of all life. And in the heart of the desert, the fragile flower of peace had begun to bloom.